Welcome to this new Motorsport Talks series with Motorsport Engineer. Motorsport Engineer is a platform for engineers and professionals who want to learn directly from the best industry professionals. We do this by publishing our own online courses and running webinars with the relevant suppliers in the industry. Today, we have Ralph Dale, a data engineer at Carlin with experience working Formula 3 and GT cars. How are you, Ralph?
I'm good, thank you, Gerard. How are you?
Very good. Thanks. Very happy to have you here today. I really look forward to talking to you in more detail about your studies, your professional experience. I think you've got a very interesting career so far, of course. It will get more interesting for sure. But before we go into those details, I would like to start by asking, who is Ralph Dale? Where are you from? Where do you come from?
Well, I was born in England, British parents, grew up in the countryside. I've got a reasonably large family with lots of couple brothers, mum and dad, and we're all into cars. So I guess that's where it began. And then since then, I've been on a path to pursue a career around cars and now racer cars.
Very good. Very interesting. So you're an engineer. You studied at university, if I'm not wrong. Where did you study?
Yeah, I studied motorsport engineering at Oxford Brookes University. Obviously, quite a niche course, but Oxford Brookes is probably one of the best places to do it. Plenty of people come from all over the world to do both the bachelor's and the postgraduate courses at Oxford Brookes. So I was really lucky to get a place at Oxford Brookes, and I hope I'm doing them proud.
Very good. And just for those who might be thinking of enrolling into master's degrees in a university in the UK, pursuing a career similar to yours, why did you choose Oxford Brookes, or did you maybe consider another university?
I did look around. There are some universities that obviously had maybe wider scope of engineering that were better at maybe the straight mechanical stuff. But for motorsport, I found Oxford Brookes was pretty much unrivaled as well. I know Hertfordshire is good as well. Plenty of great guys come from there. But for me, it was Oxford Brookes.
Very good. There's no doubt that the results are there, but we'll find out about that in a moment. So what did you get involved at university? Did you get involved with Formula Student, for instance? We've got a lot of people who spend long hours working their Formula Student cars, and I wonder whether that was the case for you.
I did do a little bit of Formula Student. I did spend about a year or two doing some of those long hours with the guys. I really admire what some of them managed to achieve. I found an easier way, or a way I was more comfortable getting experience, was working possibly with some small race teams, but I know Formula Student has really helped a lot of people get to where they are in some incredible places.
So that's something you would recommend? Would you recommend people getting involved in Formula Student?
I think so. There's definitely other ways of getting experience as well, but Formula Student, if that's what you're doing, if that's what works for you, is a really great way of getting a career in motorsport.
Very good. And how about your dissertation? Is there anything interesting that you can highlight from it?
I did, my dissertation, I did a setup optimization of a touring car, a British touring car. So I worked with a very small British touring car team that were at the back of the grid. And since then, they've gone on to have a few wins, but it was, prime how to be a race engineer, learning about the springs, the roll bars, rider frequencies, and that was really good fun. Really good to get involved in something hands-on that wasn't quite just so theoretical.
So I know at Oxford Brookes they have their own 4-post shaker rig. Is that something that maybe you were able to play with for the dissertation to come up with the best setup for the car?
Yeah, I did use it very briefly for my dissertation. I also used the rig numerous times on the open days, helping out the university and promoting the university and showing people what we can use the rig for. There's a huge number of things you can do with it other than just testing suspension and primary rides. So it's a really great tool to have, and I was lucky to have it. I believe it still is the only one in a university at the moment.
Very good. So that kind of wraps up your university studies. You didn't go for a master's degree, if I'm not wrong. But what you did do, and I think you briefly touched on this, you were involved with several racing teams while still at university. So I've been looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I can see 2 different pillars that can be identified. One is like stints, short stints with race teams while at university, and then from the moment that you graduate onwards, you've been in other racing teams, of course, having kind of more responsibility and so on. So I think it might be good to talk about these two different pillars, starting with all the race teams that you were involved during the university days. And also the first one was an internship with a company or a team called BPS, Base Performance Simulators.
Yeah, so base performance simulators, I think quite a few people in GT racing and possibly even in single seaters around the UK will know of them. It was a simulator company, driver in the loop sim. So just like what all the Formula One teams and even us Formula 3 teams have. It was founded by three-time Le Mans winner, I believe now, Darren Turner. And pretty much there, it's everyone turns up. Any race team, normally some of the biggest and best race teams in the country, they'll turn up with their drivers, with their engineers, Formula E teams, GT teams. Everyone is welcome, and they all pay for time in the simulator to prepare for their race weekend. So it was a really good way of me to meet the teams and see how they work, and also learn how we operate around race teams and how they like to operate.
Mm-hmm. So that was in 2015, if I'm not wrong, summer 2015.
Yeah.
You must have been like 20 years old by then.
Yeah, so I did about a year and a half on and off with them, just doing 1 or 2 days a week with them. Their business director at the time, Ella Barrington, was an Oxford Brook graduate. I reached out to her originally for the Formula Student team, so that helped the Formula Student team actually build a car model and a track model for the Formula Student competition. And then going on from that, Ella very kindly offered me if I wanted to come along and work for them during my studies. So that was some extra work to do, but I really enjoyed it. I started just doing 1 or 2 days a week. I know a few guys. One guy from the Formula Student team has now gone on to work for them doing simulators.
Very good. So is that something common? That of course, when you're in the Formula Student team at your university, you have to reach out to a lot of kind of industry suppliers, a lot of companies involved in the motorsports industry. Is it common for a company to kind of propose, would you like to come work with us for a few days or help us out in a number of things? Is that something that in your experience has happened regularly with your friends from university and so on?
I think it's reasonably rare. Obviously, Formula Student, everyone knows motorsport costs money. And with Formula Student, one of the battles is doing the best you can with the budget you have. And that's what brings out some of the best engineers. And I think that's why Formula Student's got such a good reputation. There are every now and then, with any good race team or any good company involved in motorsport, you have candidates that stand out and people that stand out and they're worth investing in. So there really is an industry built on reputation and your performances rather than anything else. So that's it.
Very good. Maybe moving on, I think a year later, or the following summer, 2016, you worked with a team called Team Parker Racing.
Yeah, so that was a pretty incredible experience. It was my third ever time at a racetrack working as an engineer. I was a data engineer for Team Parker Racing on one of their Bentley GT3 cars. So I just did that one round. It was Spa 24 in 2016. So the other car had Chris Harris driving it. I was working on the Pro-Am car. We got pole position in our class. Unfortunately, the car DNF'd at Spa about the 13th or 14th hour in the middle of the night at Spa, which is hard, but that's the way Spa 24 is, and it's still the ultimate challenge. But that was a time, again, at university where I'm at the bottom of the ladder trying to get experience, calling up every team. It's the best way to do it, and just keep hassling them. Eventually, they'll give you a little bit of experience. So
totally, yeah. I mean, I cannot imagine being in your university days and already being at the track with a racing team helping them out. Was that your first time at Spa?
It was my first time at Spa. Yeah, it was my third race. So the first two races were with a small Aston Martin team that I think we'll come on to. But it was my first time at Spa. It's probably still my favourite race circuit to go back to. I've run it a few times. I've cycled it a few times. I've not been around it in a car yet, but it's by far my favourite circuit. The wind and the rain always comes into it. It always rains at Spa, so it's another great challenge.
Excellent. And then, so again, moving on, I can see another experience on your CV. You work with JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, so a very big
Yeah.
company in the UK, very well known, I think, for lots of engineering graduates. I think most of us have looked at opportunities in these sort of companies. So what was your role with the company?
So with Jaguar, I was very kind to have a friend on the inside who had me in for pretty much for a summer. Again, I guess he saw something in me that he wanted to reward and see what I could do. So I spent my summer, rather than building the Formula Student car, I chose to work even harder, I guess, and maybe get a little bit of money in my pocket, go to Jaguar, work with them. I was working on quality engineering,
Hmm.
something I'd never really experienced much at university, a lot more about optimizing processes and procedures. So that was really interesting, seeing how they write processes and procedures that are robust for a company with 30 or 40,000 employees trying to make a million cars. I didn't think ultimately that I had the love for automotive. I think I could still go back, but obviously motorsport is where it's at for me at
Hmm.
the moment.
Yeah, I still remember James Baldwin. I guess you had James Baldwin as well at
Yeah, I
work.
did. What a
I still
guy.
I still remember him saying it's all about passion, right? So I think
All about passion.
that's the reality. That's what we want. And so you work there in parallel to helping out the guys at Team Parker.
So I remember one day I was literally on my lunch hour at Jaguar calling up more and more race teams. Eventually, I got through to Team Parker Racing, to Stuart Parker, who's the team principal, the team owner, and he said, "Yep, okay, we'll have you along, get some experience, come and help at Spa 24." Spa is a huge race for GT racing, is probably the biggest race of the year in Europe after Le Mans, or even alongside Le Mans, and all the teams look to bulk out their staff a little bit because
Hmm.
it's such an arduous race. It's really hard. So having extra staff, it gave me a good opportunity to get into motorsport.
Excellent. And then I've also seen experience with Aston Martin Racing. Is that with the Works team, or was it
That was
customer
with a
team?
customer, one
Customer
of the
team.
customer teams. So I work with Whitebridge Motorsport a little bit. Is a friend who I got introduced to through a driver coach from Base Performance Simulators, actually. And then I
Hmm.
also worked with Generation Aston Martin Racing briefly. So throughout sort of those sort of 2 years at university, towards the end, I was doing little bits, and even at the start of my graduate job with RML that we'll come on to, I was spending the weekends still plucking away, getting to the circuit, doing engineering and learning how the whole trackside environment works and what makes people tick.
Hmm. So I think this kind of summarizes your roles and different sort of experience levels you've had while at university. And I think there's one question that comes to my mind, and is what do you think was the key factor that made it work for you? Right, because it's not easy. Like you're at university as so many other people, and I wonder what was special about yourself that that made it possible for you to kind of have these roles. I don't know whether there's something you've thought about or kind of questioned yourself if there's one single thing that helped you with this.
Ooh, I don't know if I can describe what helped me with it. I think every time I went to the circuit, I enjoyed it and I wanted to go back. And obviously at the start, I wasn't very good, as is
Hmm.
everyone. So I wanted to go back and get better and obviously work with the best teams and go, look for pole positions and look for more performance and get race wins. I think it's just passion. You have to be, like you said, like James said, you have to be passionate. There was points at university towards the end where I was working with base performance simulators maybe once a week, and then also going to work with race teams on the weekend. I briefly
Hmm.
then also worked at another simulator place called Race Hut, which is just the Race Hut in England is just a load of simulators. Like all your friends can come for a party, play on the simulators and race, but it was more experience. I had experience on the software as well from base performance simulators. So I think I was always trying to get more experience and keep busy and immerse myself in all the different corners of it. So I
So,
think if you're passionate, it will find its own way.
so you never stayed kind of home, always trying to look for opportunities in this industry that you're very passionate about.
Yeah, and even now, looking always, there's always another team, or there's maybe not another team, but there's always another level you can push yourself to. And we got 5 wins last year. Well, now we need to get 6 or 7 on a championship. So, as with everyone, you're always looking to improve and build yourself.
Mm-hmm. So there's a more specific question I'll ask you on this, but do you think that while you were at university, was it because your hard skills, so maybe your university grade, or maybe you knew certain industry softwares that were very relevant, or was it more to do with maybe soft skills, the way you interacted with people, how many people you knew, or a combination of both that might have helped with what you did?
It's an interesting question. I think there's absolutely were people, I think, as with everyone, there's always somebody who is better than you at studies or exams or university. And I was okay. I got through, I did my bit, but I knew I wanted to be at the circuit, not always staring at the computer revising and working.
Mm-hmm.
I managed to get my hands around Motec and some other basic software like Cosworth. That obviously is a really great tangible asset and a tool to race teams, whereas maybe being incredible at MATLAB is a really great tool and a really great asset to have. But to the smaller, more junior race teams, some real practical hands-on experience and ability to use the software they use is even better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I think this wraps up the first pillar I was referring to in the beginning, right? So you graduate from Oxford Brookes, and then what happens?
So then I spent a summer working again. I spent yet another summer working. I think I spent almost every summer working, but I spent the last summer working just for a classic car company nearby where I live, back in the Cotswolds, where my family are. That was, again, incredible. More weekends spent going and working with race teams. I'd already secured, luckily through working with a touring car team at university, I managed to secure a graduate chassis engineer job with RML Group, who the geeks will know, the touring car geeks will know. RML Group, they build all of the subframes, all of the suspension for all the touring cars. So for RML, me already having some touring car experience was obviously a great experience. They were looking to recruit a small range, 3 or 4 graduate engineers, some to do design, some to do engines and powertrain, but also someone to do maybe the trackside stuff, the performance work. So that's where I came in.
So again, through an introduction, through someone that had referred you already knew you.
Meeting the engineers at the circuit as well. That was really good. My manager I met at the circuit, who became to be my future manager, Adam Airy. I met him at the circuit, so that was great. That was before I even had a job offer, so that was pretty incredible.
So there you go. That's the power of knowing people, right? And having done your homework beforehand, proving what's your worth and what you can do. And of course, that kind of makes things a lot easier when you want to find a job when you finish university. And so, what kind of projects were you involved in at RML?
So RML, so we were involved with the Jaguar GT4 car.
Mm-hmm.
So I was responsible for all of the control systems and all of the logging system on that. So that was quite an experience. I was thrown in the deep end there. I was pretty much given the electronic package for the car. The wiring loom was all made, but all of the buttons didn't do anything. So I had to pretty much make all the buttons work, all the logging, all the dash configs, the shift lights, make that all work. We also did some other work that I can't talk about, but then we were lucky enough to get involved with Neo with their EP9 electric hypercar, track-only car. So I was there for the latter stages of that. Also, that was great. And I think my favourite project while I was there was the road legal Aston Martin Vulcan. That was quite cool. We had to convert one of, I think, 20 or 30 Aston Martin Vulcans to road legal spec. This is a GT3 type car with 800 horsepower. To make it road legal was quite a good fun project.
Very good. And you said 20 to 30 units?
I think there were about 20 or 30 Vulcan cars. We were just given the one from a private customer to make it road legal. He wanted to drive it on the road. I think since then it's gone and done the Gumball 3000 rally. So that was pretty cool to see. I think there's a lot of footage on YouTube. We even made a film with Love Cars on YouTube about the conversion process. So again, that was interesting. That was sort of half a road car, half a race car, but crucially, the car uses all Cosworth parts, like most Aston Martin racing products. So it gave me a really good knowledge of every corner of Cosworth's Cosworth electronic architecture and how to program that.
Very good. So it sounds like it was an intense experience with RML. It was about a year that you spent with them, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, just a year there. And then I think eventually I did, luckily enough, do a little bit of extra trackside work again on my weekends, always working away. I think eventually I found a point I wanted to be at the circuit even more than I was, not just on the weekends. And so that's probably why I didn't spend so long there.
And so how did you manage to kind of transition into a more trackside role after RML?
So I knew I wanted to be at the track. I had a couple of leads. I managed to get an interview with Aston Martin Racing, actually, with ProDrive to become a customer support engineer. I got an interview with them and got down to the last three with them. Then actually another contact, a race engineer who I'd worked with in touring cars, said that Carlin had a vacancy that he'd not been able to get, interestingly, for some reason or another. And he gave me an email, and that's all it took to get my CV in. I sent in my CV with a load of screenshots of all the data analysis that I've done before on the Aston Martin racing cars and on the Vulcan and everything else. So I think that's what hooked them in to get me in for interview at Carlin.
And how was the recruitment process? I mean, of course, without giving away any information that might be confidential or that you don't want to give away, but was it a structured recruitment process? Were there lots of interviews? Was there a HR department involved? What could you maybe share with us?
It's interesting. It was probably not as much as you imagine. It was pretty much just me and the chief engineer, Mark Owen, sat down in one of the engineering offices. He had a list of obviously some of the more basic HR questions, but then there were some technical questions. It wasn't like doing a thermofluids exam. I'm not always the strongest at those technical interviews that you might get maybe with a Formula One team. But luckily, the main aspect of the interview was going over a data screenshot, and all the channels, all the names of the channels were blanked out. And I had to guess or use my knowledge of how race engines and gearboxes and wheel speed sensors and everything behaves. I had to basically label all of the sensors and all of the aspects. So there were some interesting traces on the graph, all again, no labels. So I had to label them, which was quite exciting, quite good fun.
So I imagine with all your experience that you have had until that point already, that must not have been a big challenge to you, I presume.
I got there in the end. Yeah, I did. There was one trace that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It took me a while and a little bit of a poke to work it out. I won't reveal it for the next Carlin candidate. There was one I'd not come across before, but after a while of staring at the squiggly lines, they don't seem squiggly lines anymore. They're the wheel speed or the brakes or the G-force, and you start to learn. You learn and form a bond and the knowledge of all the shapes and the traces and the curves.
I can imagine. So then you made it into Carlin. What's your role with Carlin?
So for the last 3 years with Carlin, this has been my fourth season starting this year. I've been doing Formula 3. It was the European Formula 3 series, won by Mick Schumacher previously and numerous others. It's now the Euro Formula Open series. F3 has split and now got into FIA International F3 as well. But I've been on that team doing European F3 for the last 3 years. Is the Dallara proper F3 car? Is the Dallara chassis made in Italy? We use a Spies Volkswagen engine with a crazy airbox out the side of the car. That's a proper F3 car. I know a lot of racing drivers even now follow up the ladder. They're very fond of that car. So for the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of getting to know that car and the team and working on an F3 car.
Mm-hmm. And I guess once you get to the level of Formula 3, which of course, I mean, some people might only think of Formula 1, but those who are true kind of motorsport engineering passionates will know that Formula 3 really is already a very serious category, and drivers have to spend a lot of money to race for a single season there. It gets to a point that you start to know very, very good drivers, right? And the level there it's extremely high. What has there been one single driver that has impressed you the most?
Oh, I'm trying to think of an answer that isn't Lando Norris. So I joined Carlin the year after Lando won the F3 championship with us. And so I'm always seeing him around the factory doing his Formula 2 that he then did with us. Whenever I see his data, his driving style is so hard for a lot of other drivers to mimic. I can't say too much about how he has his car, but he's hands down the most impressive driver I think I've seen at Carlin.
Right. Okay. Because it's a difficult question. I know you might not want to reveal much, but what makes it so special? Is it something to do with the setup that he likes, or what is it that makes it different?
I think ultimately, when you ask drivers if they prefer oversteer or understeer, all of the maths and the simulations generally says oversteer, and oversteering or slightly oversteering handling balance is always better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just how much drivers can cope with that. And I think Lando could just cope with a little bit more, really like that positive front end. So there's loads of different ways we went about achieving it. And I know we've tried to use what he's had in his setup before with newer, younger drivers, and they just struggle a little bit with that possibly. But ultimately, it's all about getting the driver comfortable in the car, whichever balance that is. But I think with Lando, it was getting that front end nailed was what it was for him.
Excellent. And if I ask you about the most challenging situation that you found yourself during your time at Carlin, what would you say it was?
The most challenging one? Probably, well, a chassis change is always a challenge. There's always 4 or 5 o'clock at the end of a day at the circuit, with an out the next day at 9 o'clock running, and we have to change a whole chassis. But that's part of the job. I think the biggest challenge we had was doing the electronic throttle system for Billy Munger. It was quite a challenge because the Formula 3 car is just a pedal linked to our throttle body of the engine just via a straight cable, just like a classic car. And we had to convert that to work off of an electronic motor with a throttle paddle, electronic throttle paddle, mounted onto the steering wheel, and then reconfiguring the steering wheel so we had his shifters on one side, a hand-operated clutch, modify the brake pedal as well. So That was quite a big project, and a lot of development work came into it, and we were very lucky to have our hard work rewarded with a win at Po. So that was pretty cool.
That's incredible. So for those who are listening and don't know Billy Munger, he sadly suffered a big accident at Donington. I think it was 20.
Yeah, British F4. I was actually there at the time, working with a touring car team. It was later on when I came to Carlin and then Billy came to Carlin, but there was a big accident. So he had both of his legs amputated, I think one above and one below the knee. That obviously meant we had to make some quite substantial modifications to what is normally a spec series car that you don't have to modify. So there was a lot of work, but Carlin is about the most able single-seater team in the country outside of Formula One. So we pulled it off.
Very good. So yeah, for those that don't know about Billy Munger and his story, I'd recommend everybody to search the Google search about him and his life. I think it's very encouraging. He's a very extraordinary person. I've never met him. I'd love to meet him at some point, but I think what he's achieved and what he's fighting for is extremely incredible and extraordinary. So you're also continuing with your career. You're also working with several other racing teams, if I'm not wrong.
A little bit on the side. So again, can't keep me away from the circuit. So I think to keep me busy and also to help broaden my network of engineers, and also to get some more experience and add more strings to my bow in other forms of motorsport. I've done a little bit of work with McLaren and a little bit of work with a Lamborghini customer team on both GT4 cars and hypercars for McLaren and GT3 cars for Lamborghini. Learning a bit about the nuances of GT racing. It obviously sounds similar, but it's so different once you're in it to single seaters. So there's some stuff that really does transfer. which is absolutely easy. And then there's some new skills you have to learn that you can even bring into the other series. So there's things we do in Formula 3 that we could do in endurance racing, maybe in GT3, and vice versa. There's some good knowledge to be transferred between the series.
Very good. So for people that look for these kind of opportunities, what are the dynamics of working sporadically with these sort of racing teams that might want someone to fly in to a racetrack? We can do that specific job and then that's it. I guess the first question is why does that happen, right? Why do they have the need for someone to jump in and out sporadically?
As you'll find with, I think, most GT or endurance racing series, is because the races are longer and because they also rely on more amateur drivers in the series, the makeup of the drivers. There are pros, some very fast factory pros like we see with Porsche and Aston Martin and Toyota, but is a series that's almost entirely built on amateur drivers funding it. So there's less race weekends. This ultimately means that it's not feasible for most teams outside of the top teams to employ people full time. So there are normally some mechanics that are full time, but a lot of the engineering team are contract engineers. So there's lots of engineers floating around. So I'm very lucky with Carlin that they see it as yet another way of improving my knowledge, and maybe that helps out Carlin as well to have someone with some extra experience that's free for me to go and get for them to let me out. So that's great.
And so you're also working at Carlin, extremely strong and powerful team racing different categories. What kind of differences can you identify between Carlin and these other teams? Of course, there is some obvious differences and for obvious reasons as well. But can you tell us a little bit about what these differences are and why?
So with, again, a lot of it comes down ultimately to the nature of the series with the more amateur drivers. With Carlin, with Formula 3, with most of our series, we're quite lucky we can do a lot of private testing, which any single-seater team wants to do. The more testing you can get with your drivers, the better you normally perform at the race events. The young drivers can commit a huge amount of time, and they have, they'll go and do homeschooling and commit as much time as they can to racing to make it their career. Whereas with the endurance racing, again, it's mostly funded by wealthy business people who need to be making their money, just like we all do. So it's a lot more about optimizing the package in a very short amount of time. There's also other ways you can get to the front of the pack at the races by doing better race strategy, better pit stops, which doesn't normally factor in a Formula 3 race. So there are nuances that are different and are very exciting to come across and challenge and deal with.
Absolutely. So I think this kind of wraps it up with your professional experience as well. And now I would like to move on to the course that you're launching in our platform. So as I was saying in the beginning, Motorsport Engineer is an e-learning platform. We've got several online courses led by industry professionals like yourself, people who work in Formula 3, people who work in Formula E and also Formula 1. And we're going to be adding more courses as we go along. But your course specifically is about data engineering in Formula 3. And now that we all know about you a lot more. We know how experienced you are. There's no question that there's a lot of value, right, in this course. You're going to be sharing a lot of kind of exclusive knowledge that you've been gaining along the years. Can you tell us a little bit about the course?
So what I want to do with the course, and what I've hoped that everyone can experience with the course, is I've tried to wrap up both some of the technical knowledge that you need and some of the engineering knowledge that you need to be a data engineer in Formula 3, but also with some of the little tips and tricks that I've learned, some of the human traits that you need, some of the problems that you might come across that are a lot more practical problems than you might think, that can't always be solved with Excel or with a spreadsheet. So there's lots of different sides to being a data engineer. There's huge numbers of different responsibilities, from radio systems to wiring looms on the car to even fixing the truck sometimes. So there's a lot of different skills, a lot of different challenges. and hopefully I've managed to cover all of them with both the technical aspects that you need and also some of the human aspect as well, and some little tips and tricks from my experiences and maybe even my mistakes along the way.
So I've seen the course already, and I can kind of assure that the course is worth, and it's super interesting. As you were saying, so it's not only about data engineering, right? There's so much more. It's not only about looking at data, looking at lines on a screen. There is so much more that you have to be aware of and you have to be knowledgeable of, and that's what you've been trying to highlight. Who would you say this course is for?
I'd say this course is for anyone that's looking to get into, obviously, the junior series and to get some experience. Lots of people just like me, they're getting little small amounts of experience with little teams here and there doing a few races. They want to make the step up, go into a proper racing series. So if they want to go and be a race engineer in Formula 3 or Formula 2, or they just want to climb the steps to the ladder to Formula 1, we've got engineers and mechanics who've all done both avenues. So I think the course is for really a huge number of people, actually. And Formula 3 is a great benchmark and a good stepping stone for a lot of people. So I hope the course is applicable to students and to graduates and to people who are just looking to get some more knowledge and want to work in Formula 3.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific requirements to follow the course?
No, a little bit of knowledge about engines is helpful. A very basic electronic knowledge is helpful, but nothing that I'm sure would surpass any able, passionate student. I think anyone that's looking at this course obviously already has the passion and already has probably, I'm sure, enough knowledge to get through this course. Everything is explained. It's not super technical. There's not massive amounts of homework. So hopefully I can guide everyone through how to be me.
I'm sure of it. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people are excited about the course. Thanks very much, Ralph, for taking the effort of preparing it. We're running out of time. There's two questions I would like to ask you before we go away. The first one is, what are the kind of specific things that you've done to get to where you are today? I think we've kind of briefly touched on it, but now that we've also covered the kind of professional experience after university, what has helped you or what have you done to get to Carly, basically, to where you are today?
I think just being passionate. I know I've said it before and it will ring through. I think maybe what I had over some of my other classmates or university friends or even other engineers that I've met is that maybe they're not passionate, and maybe there comes a point where they want to get their work done and then go home, or maybe they've called a few race teams and they couldn't get any experience, so they call it a day. I think I was always constantly on the phone, email people, catch up with people, go and see them. Don't let, if you ask someone and they say no, you've not lost anything, so just go and ask the next person. So I think just sticking at it. If you're at the circuit and it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the evening, you have to rebuild a car that's had all four corners come off. If you do the job and you rush it, then it's going to come back and bite you. But do things properly, chill out, nice and calm, just be resilient. Don't let things get to you. I think that's maybe what's helped me along, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very interesting piece of advice. And then the second question is, what advice would you give to students that are looking for trackside roles today, in times of pandemics where things are not easy? What could you say to them? There's a lot of people struggling, and they are extremely passionate as well, as you said. There's a lot of uncertainty. What would you say to these people?
I think a lot of people might now be thinking that there's no hope for them getting experience or getting work in motorsport because of how expensive motorsport is and how possibly incomes are low in motorsport at the moment. The reality is a lot of race teams I know are going out testing. If they're not going out testing or going to racetracks, they're at the factory rebuilding the cars so they're ready for the year. What a lot of candidates will have is that they're willing to work for only a small amount of money or possibly even just volunteer and help out for a race team. That's invaluable. Again, it's money they haven't got to spend, but it's great experience for candidates who want to just go and get some experience if that's what they want. So actually now might be a great time to go and get some experience. I'm sure race teams would happily take an extra pair of hands at this time.
Excellent. That's positively encouraging. Well, thank you very much, Ralph. This is the end of our conversation, and I'm very happy. Thank you very much for kind of sharing your experience with us, sharing your advice also with the students and young professionals who want to follow your steps. And thanks very much. We'll be able to kind of follow your course on the following videos, and I'm sure people will be very inspired by your words.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be asked to make a course up alongside some such esteemed and knowledgeable tutors. I had a really great time making the course, and I hope everybody enjoys it. I'm hoping there's a few more questions for me from some eager young engineers.
I'm sure that will be the case. So this is the end of this video. As you know, you will be able to find more courses similar to Ralph's in our Motorsport Academy, following the URL motorsportengineer.net. We've got courses from Formula 1 professionals, formerly professionals, and so on. And we really hope that you enjoy them and extract a lot of knowledge from them. So until we see you the next time, stay healthy and goodbye.